Good afternoon and welcome. Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon to hear from order with us just last month to be prophetic witnesses and to learn more about what was happening, not just around family separation, but around family detention, how asylum seekers were being treated and welcomed at our southern border in Texas, and also what all of us can do and how we can bring that back to our communities. My name is Sarah Benitez. I'm the organizing director here at Faith in Public Life, and I was blessed and honored to go on this delegation with the many wonderful women faith leaders who came with us. Today, we're lucky to have a few of them to be here to share their experiences and how we can all keep lifting up and spreading awareness about families who are being detained, who are still in the process of waiting to be united, and keep making sure that this never happens again in our country. So I want to just share a little bit about what we did while we were on this trip. We went to McAllen and Brownsville, Texas from June 27th to June 29th. As many of you have followed in the news, starting in April, Attorney General Jeff Sessions had announced a new zero tolerance policy, or we like to call an inhuman policy, or zero humanity policy, that was intended to criminalize and every immigrant who was found along the border, including asylum seekers, even though often the government said that was not the case. And then in the process, children were taken away from parents and other family members who they had arrived at the southern border with. Many were claiming asylum coming from Honduras, El Salvador, Guatemala, even from Mexico, where they are fleeing violence and really running for their lives to protect their children and themselves. So from the time of May to June, the federal government at the southern border, led by Customs and Border Patrol, but empowered by Department of Justice, Department of Homeland Security, separated nearly 3,000 children from their family members. We know reporting is not as clear. And right now, the government is under a court order and an injunction to stop them from separating families, but to also reunite them. They have until this Thursday to reunite over 2,000 children with their parents. It's expected they will not make that deadline. The federal government, none of those agencies, including Health and Human Services, was tracking closely who parents were, who kids were, where they were being sent across the country to different shelters, different detention centers. So this is an ongoing crisis and really a moral call to our nation continue to speak up and take action until this is fixed, until families are supported while they are reunited and continue to pursue their asylum claims, and until we get to a place as a country where all people's human dignity is respected and treated as it should. So to make that possible and for us to learn more about how we could lift up our voices and bring that back to our communities, we went to the border. We stayed outside of the Customs and Border Protection facility where families and children are being kept in the cages that many of you have seen on the news. We also went to the respite center that's run by Catholic Charities in McAllen, Texas, to minister and provide basic needs to asylum seekers who have been released by CBP. And we had with families there and were able to pray and talk with them, and with Sister Norma from Catholic Charities. And then we also, the ACLU led a group of folks going into the courthouse to witness criminal proceedings against immigrants. So I want to introduce the wonderful faith, their experiences, what they learned, what they saw, what they want all of us to remember and to do now. So today we have Reverend Maria Swearingen from Calvary Baptist Church here in DC, Reverend Susie Painter with the Cooperative Baptist Fellowship, and Reverend Sakina Hamlin with the Center for Responsible Lending. So I want to ask you all if you could each tell us, what moved you most about this trip and that delegation? It was a short time, but we did and saw that. And so I'd love for you to share. How about we start with you, Susie?
I think one of the things that moved me the most was the nature of power and powerlessness that we saw exhibited over and over again both at the detention centers between the folks that were separated and how powerless the parents were to even communicate with their children, and that contrast of powerlessness in the face of power, even when you're the parent. I think we saw this juxtaposition of power and powerlessness, in the context of as we stood outside the courtroom and even tried to just get in through security, and how every kind of tool of power was used to over and over. Well, do you have your driver's license? And, are you wearing this? And can you pass this to get in? Just the use of power to constantly create powerlessness in both the advocates and the folks that were victims of this disproportionate and egregious separation.
Thank you, Susie. And Reverend Sakina Hamlin clarified, and my apologies, that she is representing the Ecumenical Poverty Initiative today, and she plays multiple roles, wears many hats, as many of our faith leaders do. So thank you, Sakina, my apologies. And do you want to go next? We have each of the speakers muted until it's your turn to speak. And tell us, what moved you most about this trip?
I think what moved me most when I think about the need to do what's best for your family and to go where you and your family can be safe, where your children can actualize that Jeremiah text that says that God has plans for us, plans for a future and a hope, so that your children can actualize that hope. What moved me most perhaps was being in that courtroom when that attorney, that judge kept saying to those that were caught crossing the border for 2 or more times, do you understand that there is nothing that would give you the right or be an excuse for you to cross this border? Not violence, not poverty, not illness, not that your family is here. And he went down the line and he said that to each and every person that he sentenced that day as we sat in that courtroom. And not only that, some of them had their children in the court with them. And so when I think about the Jeremiah text and parents trying to give their children hope, and when I think about what that judge says, I'm still moved. I'm still moved, and I'm still compelled to do more.
Excellent. Very well said. Thank you, Reverend Sakina. And Reverend Maria, would you like to share sort of what moved you most about the trip and what's been staying with you? It's been almost a month now. What are you still thinking about?
I found myself moved short time there. I think sometimes as pastors, we try to take our theological lens off so we don't look like we're always doing that. And yet I found myself meeting 3 people in particular. One of them was named Adan, in English, Adam. One was Maria, and one was Jesus. And Adan's story in preliminary court was that I watched a CBP officer describe pulling him out of the Rio Grande as he was seeking safe passage for himself and his family. And it's hard not to imagine the original Adam playing in rivers and waters that were meant for goodness and joy and creation. So the dissonance of sitting in a courtroom and hearing pulling Adan out of this holy water was wrenching. To hear Maria's story at Catholic Charities, who pointed to her left and to her right, her 2 sons next to her, as I knelt down beside her to hear more of her story from El Salvador, fleeing violence with her children. She points to her ankle bracelet and looks at me and says, "I do all of this for them." how do I not hear Mary, the mother of Jesus, saying, I traversed to Bethlehem and made my way into Egypt for him. Jesus was in sentencing court. As Reverend Sakina just pointed to, hearing a judge say to him, stand there in chains. There's nothing you could do or nothing that could affect you that would give you the right to cross illegally into this country. To watch, as Reverend Painter put it, someone in a position of power say this to someone named Jesus. It was hard for me as a pastor not to see Adan, Maria, and Jesus, the biblical characters, living right in front of me and being abused by our system.
Beautiful. And all of you, reflect on so many important encounters that we had that we're carrying with us still, and that we're still feeling called, and those folks that we talked to or we saw in court, or maybe we didn't see, but we prayed outside of that CBP warehouse, essentially. And we don't know them, we don't know their names, but we continue to feel them and pray for them and call out to seek action for them. So thank you for sharing those reflections. I think, I've been still thinking about that warehouse that we prayed outside of the first day, which was the least interaction we sort of had with any people. But I think it's that inhumanity that made it so striking to me, and the normalization of it. That warehouse has been there for years, holding people in cages, separated from their families. Companies are making deliveries and trucks are coming and going. We've accepted the normalization of treating humans as less than in this way for many years. But the time now that folks are rising up and speaking out, hopefully will make that change in the long run. So I wanted to also, what is one thing you learned that you've been sharing with others as you've come back, and that you think is important for people listening today and watching us to know, that they might not know? So I'll go back to Susie if you want to start us off again.
Let me just pick up with the lesson of, let me just pick up with that lesson about humanization in warehouses and this normalization. So one lesson is, this is a pattern that is not just at the border, but all across our country, to which presence and witness needs to be applied. To take out of schedules and time, to use resources to show up, to be there. The lesson is the strength of witness and voice to this process. One thing that struck me time and time again, well, of course, was how unprepared the process was for these families. That was not just an indication of kind of mediocre management. It looked to me, in scale and in the deprivation model, the kind of even the way they address children. They aren't children; they're unaccompanied minors. They're just this kind of objectification language that's used. To me, it looks like staging for larger deportation of 10 million people. And it, as egregious and horrible as it is in itself, it being a witness to it, being present to it, wherever it is in the country, I would say one of the lessons I learned is not just to go to the border, but wherever these places are around the country, to be a witness and be a presence to it, because it is bigger than this moment. It is also about the preparation of continuing the dehumanization of this entire mobilization and racism that's inherent in this. And I love what Maria said about the echo of the scripture. You cannot stand in the presence of this kind of dehumanization with a belief in the value of the Imago Dei in every person. and not feel the responsibility of our voice as Christians to speak up and to act deliberately to undo this trend and the way in which it is gaining momentum. It is not about to end. It is about to be worse.
Very well said, Susie. And I want to just let folks know we are here to be able to do this Facebook Live with folks in different cities today. So if you could bear with us as some of the sound is cutting out, we're doing our best. And if you have questions or didn't hear something, wanted to ask one of the women faith leaders here to say it again, feel free to put it in the Facebook comment. We'll make sure to ask them again. And hopefully, you're catching most. I think we're doing pretty good with this new technology here, and appreciate everyone's patience. So that's one thing that you've learned, that you've been sharing with folks that they might not know, that they're not hearing in the news, that they need to hear from us.
I think, I as well was really struck by what it looked like in federal immigration court, and I think millions of people across the country need to know what's happening in those courtrooms, what's being said, how it's being said. Case in point, it still sort of stuns me to tell the story, but I think it needs to be told. I mean, we were sitting in the back row of federal immigration court and heard a defense attorney, so an attorney defending his client, say to the judge, I want you to know that I voted for Trump and I want a border wall too, but here's why my client's story is different from all the other illegal immigrants crossing the border. So to watch that kind of rhetoric unfold just think that there really just are a few people in the room catching that, and how quickly all these cases are being churned in and out. We didn't see one of the mass hearings that was described. That was at 10 a.m. that morning. We were there in the afternoon. So just thinking about the sheer number of these cases, the way in which this kind of language and rhetoric is getting lost, it feels, I agree with you, Reverend Painter, people need to be bearing witness in these spaces and recording, documenting, speaking, and at every opportunity telling the stories that they see there.
Absolutely. And you're both right that these policies are not gone. The zero tolerance policy is on pause while the administration figures out how it can detain families together longer, and asks the courts to allow them to do that, and asks for Congress for more funding. So they are, in fact, Susie, Reverend Painter, as you said, preparing for larger escalation of detention, of deportations, of these court proceedings. They're just in a pause right now, really. So it is important that we all know the beginning and maybe even a middle of what's been happening for many years with our immigration system and policy. And that is the time for us to be speaking up and taking action right now. Reverend Sakina, would you like to share what you learned? And then I have a question here from one of our
Okay. Sure. One of the things that I often share with people that was new for me is that there are these two systems running, and those that come across the border as unaccompanied minors, despite if they're crossing a border with an aunt or uncle, which at least in my family and a lot of African American families and families of color would not be considered unaccompanied or not with a family member, but those that cross the border without a mother or father with them would be deemed unaccompanied, and then they would have to then represent themselves They don't have to have, these children don't have to have legal representation. We don't owe them that, apparently. And they have to traverse the legal system by themselves. And that stands out, and that's often what I say to people, because during slavery times, people were devalued, families were broken up. You were given no protection under the law. You were categorized in such a way that thereby you had no rights, no legal rights. You were expected to go through the violence that's often within a criminal justice system or an immigration system or any type of system, quite honestly, and you were expected to deal with it. So when I think about a 2-year-old, when I think about somebody my son's age who's 4 or my daughter who's 6, having to understand this. Thankfully, there are some that are attorneys that we met and were with us that try to help in this, but they're not required to do so. Our country says that these kids, these little ones, God's children, do not deserve such. So that's one thing I often like to lift up, particularly how it connects with how we look at who is human and who is not, who is valued and who is not, and how we categorize in such a way to terrorize families as well as to segregate people and even our children so that they won't receive certain rights.
Very powerfully said. And yes, absolutely important to reuniting of family members right now. It is just parents and children. So anyone who came with a grandparent, an aunt, an uncle, an older sibling, they are not necessarily being reunited. They're not the ones that are part of this court case. And very often, they go through the system as unaccompanied children. And they've also been separated from their family. And that legal rights are, they're not counted. We don't actually know the numbers, as Reverend Sakina is letting me know, of those numbers of family members who've been separated now and in the past and ongoing. I do want to lift up one really great organization that is representing children in court called Kids in Need of Defense, and that they are taking donations, and also for folks who want to go to the border areas and volunteer, have time to lend to that, or kinds of that extra support. We're going to share that link now on Facebook so that you can learn more about the work they're doing and how you can get involved and support that concrete representation they're providing. And I think that's really important to highlight. The reason we went to a courthouse and that we wanted to do that kind of witness is because that is the location where the dehumanization is happening. There are the places where families are being detained and there's the separation, but it's because of that policy and what's happening through that legal framework that is having that ripple effect and causing all of the harm we're trying to do and will continue to happen. So I did want to ask, we did have one question come through on Facebook that was from Barb, asking if there's any ministering being done for the spiritual and emotional welfare of these children. And it's a really important question. It's one we're also trying to find out more about. I know that along the border where there are respite centers like the Humanitarian McAllen, Texas, with Catholic Charities. Sister Norma is a Catholic woman religious praying and ministering to families. There are priests that come, there are masses held. Same in other parts of the border, like Annunciation House in El Paso. And right now, there are 2 religious agencies that are facilitating the reunifications, Catholic Charities and Lutheran and Immigration and Refugee Services, who are providing the basic needs. And there are chapels where children are still held who are unaccompanied or still waiting to reunite with family, and detention centers. So some of that is happening, but certainly more is needed. And we're looking into as well on the mental health side, what comes next and what are ways that folks in our network, Faith and Public Life, and our religious organizations be supporting those families in what's going to be a long road for them, even after they're reunited, to deal with the trauma of this experience. So that's ongoing work and a good question. And I do want to ask, you know, around that question of trauma, Reverend Sakina, how is that, do you see being connected to trauma experienced by other immigrant communities in the U.S. that you work with right now or that you're hearing about? And how are you, you know, seeing also the echo of historical experiences of dehumanization? You've talked a bit about that. I was wondering if you could say more.
Sure. Let me just also say, to expound on that question as well. You know, we do want to lift up all of the work as you have that has already happened at the border, and be very clear. I thought it was very powerful that with Catholic Charities, their tagline, if you will, on their door was they were restoring human dignity. And so this whole notion of ministering to and being the hands and feet of God is very powerful in a tangible way there. One of the things that we did, even as we were at the respite center, was to engage and talk with kids and with parents and families. And I'm hearing our colleague, Dr. Ava Carruthers of the Samuel DeWitt Proctor Institute, even as she and I were together ministering with families, and she expressed to them how the ancestors, the African ancestors, called us to this place, and shared with them even some of our own story in terms of being descendants of enslaved Africans in this country, and going through that and continuing to go through, if you will, of slavery, but then the trauma that comes after it, that you continue to hear and see echoes, if you will. So for me, this past weekend, I was in Montgomery, Alabama, at the Legacy Museum, which is a place and a place where the history of lynching, if you will, and even soil from places where Black folks that were lynched is there. And it's in a building that is actually the place where slaves were sold. And so when I think about the dehumanization of enslaved Africans, how families were torn apart, when I think about even how Japanese Americans were put in internment camps, when I think about how Native people and their children were torn from them, even in my home state of North Carolina, we deal with this issue, and how they were torn from them to make them white, because our families were seen as less than. And in those situations, we had ways in which we outlawed certain things, or we dealt with certain things policy-wise. But the challenge continues to be in this country is that we never truly have dealt with the fact that we have been adverse to or resistant to accepting the true ideology that God would have for us, that all people are created equal, that all were born with dignity and worth. And so because of that, even if a policy is stopped, let's say zero tolerance goes away today, but we still have this narrative that says that some people are less than, and some people's lives are more worthy, or some people's families are worthy to be saved, if you will, or to come into this country. If we still continue to let that narrative be the cultural law, then we will find ourselves in this situation again. And we will keep fighting the same demons because we have not wrestled against the powers and principalities in such a way that we have truly won. And God is calling us to win at this time. We have to live in such a way that that we fight back and control and transform the narrative. And we do that through our churches. We do that through the healing of these families and of the children and ministering. But we do that through Christian education.
So beautiful, powerful. Amen. Thank you, Reverend Sakina, for that. And that's right. That's the continued work we are doing. And I want to ask along that question, or along those lines, of how does this impact how you preach now, Reverend Maria Swearingen? How have you shifted, or have you how you're ministering in your congregation since you've come back?
Well, we were starting a series at Calvary called Un Mundo Sin Muros, or A World Without Walls, in which we're imagining together each week for several months now what walls around us need to be torn down or scaled above or reimagined. And I think Reverend Hamlin spoke right to it. My sermon, turning. And Dr. King talked about the trifecta of militarism, racism, and capitalism for a reason. And I'm thinking, even as you were speaking to as we're standing outside this detention center in the middle of a street that's all warehouses with production and commodities and products. And here these people are sitting in a space around a bunch of other spaces for production. And to hear you, Reverend Hamlin, talk about being at the museum and noting that it was a place where slaves were formerly sold. Talking about our history of the way in which not only have we dehumanized people, but we have turned people into forms of production. So people no longer are people, they are modalities for our unfettered capitalism and so we have to continue to call people of faith to reimagine what their faith demands of them, and what their faith will perpetually demand of them. I mentioned this in my sermon. Sister Norma, she said that the one question, the first question she asks people when they get to Catholic Charities, after they've made this journey and they've gotten out of federal immigration court, and it's the first time they're actually seeing people wave at them and welcome them and dignify their presence, she simply asks them, "How are you doing?" And I think we have to name that is not a question that capitalism or nationalism knows how to ask. It does not ask, "How are you doing?" It asks, "What can you do for this?" Or "What can you do for me?" Or "How can you be production?" And so right there we see the radical theological shift that Christians can offer the world, because we actually demand that we ask one another, "How are you doing?" And then based on that response, we shape our living together. We shape our policy around the answer to how you're actually doing. And so, I think I dream of a country and a world where churches where that question is just generating out of them. How are you doing? And then everything we do is shaped by how people respond to that.
Yeah, absolutely right. For us to be thinking about what should it look like? What do we want to call into being? What does it look like to live up to who Reverend Sakina was saying? And so taking it kind of to a bigger picture, I do want to ask Reverend Susie, how can networks and denominations like Cooperative Baptist Fellowship, what can they be doing? How can they respond to the crisis and to this moment?
Well, I think it's very incumbent on us as community of churches and Christians, first of all, to amplify and replicate the voices, the stories, and give folks channels for responding. So I think for larger groups like denominational networks and networks of churches and concerned people, book clubs, dinner clubs, to access webinars, to respond to the call for support from respite centers, to speak to policymakers. Do not pass go or collect $200. Go talk to your local elected official and just express your outrage. Tell a story. At the respite center, one of the most interesting and beautiful things that we saw as people came in. There was a mom and a daughter, little girl about 4, and a mom, and they were leaving. She was leaving court. She had a manila envelope of court papers, and they were so happy to be sitting down to a steaming bowl of caldo, chicken caldo that was comfort food, and they were eating together, and the little girl sitting in her mom's lap. And then they were moving to the rooms where they had clothing, you know, room for children's clothing, and room for the mom's clothing. And the little girl was saying in Spanish, "Mom, I want to wear pink. I want to wear pink. I want pink pants. I want a pink shirt. I want a pink hair bow. Mom, I want you to wear pink. Mama, please, you go." And then when they went into her rooms, they're all picking out pink outfits. And a little while later, they were back in the main area, sitting, mom holding the little girl, watching Moana, the movie, all dressed in pink. I thought, oh, you know, they'd had their showers, they'd had their hot bowl of soup, they were sitting, they'd made phone calls to their family members, and this beautiful Madonna and child moment of this family just touched me. And the next day, after I'd been to court and seen 100 folks in one of the mass hearings where they were barely represented, and it was just sort of a travesty of justice in a way. I mean, the just kind of insufficient representation that was there and all of that. I was really just trying to process it through my head as I drove from that court to the airport and went through security and went down to gate 5, McAllen, you know, in the little airport there, turned around the corner, and there at my gate 5, sitting close to the front, was this mom and this daughter in pink. They were on the airplane. They had their red bag from the respite center, and they were on my flight. And they were just a normal family. Everybody was just sitting in the gate waiting to fly, and there they were, just a normal family. And I felt like God gave me that gift at that moment. This is the "how are you doing" question that Maria is saying. This is how we can be family to one another. And that here they were, everybody at that gate, they were one among many, just another precious mom and daughter on my flight from McAllen to Dallas to meet their family. And this is so much more the story of the border and migration in our world. We have made it into another story.
Mm-hmm.
The change of the narrative from a story of wholeness and goodness to a story of fear, fracturedness, and injustice is a burden that we carry as a people. And so as denominations and churches, we must tell the story. There's an old Baptist hymn that says, we love to tell the story of Jesus and his love. Well, it's that day. There is a way to tell the story of love. And I think that's the compelling call for us now that we will be held accountable for.
Absolutely, that is. So I do want to share, because I think this echoes what you've both been talking about. One of the questions that's come through, Carlos asks, I haven't seen any data that this has made our borders more secure either. Was there anything you saw that would indicate otherwise? Would anyone want to answer, or any takers? I'll just share. I mean, having been to the southern border many times, it's a very peaceful, quiet place where people live their daily lives and cross back and forth normally. Who was driving our van, whose name was also Jesus, who told us the same thing, that, you know, oh, they've been putting up more walls and things, but it doesn't change anything for us here. We've always been safe. Maria, did you want to add something to that?
I mean, I just spending some time and learning even about the history of the Treaty of Hidalgo and the way in which this river has been turned into what it is now, I think is worth our time and imagination. There's there's nothing about any of this that is making anyone safer. So no, I saw nothing but uh, a witness, a representation of violence and nationalism.
I did want to share, we're getting a lot of great comments. We want to thank everybody who's been participating and sharing your. One comment came from, I think, Mare, who says, we are not dealing with disposables, but with our brothers and sisters who have a God-given dignity and right to a safe place. I don't think it could be said any better. So, I am done with our questions and what we wanted to talk about. I want to just, if any folks have any remaining questions, feel free to send those in. You watching right now can take action, and that you can encourage your friends, your family, your congregations, your neighbors to also speak up and to join us. We may not all be able to go to the border right now, but we can bring the border to where we are. We can tell these stories. We can keep calling the alarm that this is continuing to happen. And the stories, I'm not sure if you had a chance to see the stories of kids telling about their experience being separated, waking up still with nightmares, being scared about where their mom or dad was, not being able to talk to them in that time. So, this is ongoing. We know that the children will not all be reunited by this Thursday. There's reports that over 400 parents have most likely been deported, meaning that those kids who are still here will have to be able to find where their parents are now and find a way to get reunited with them. And exactly what Reverend Susie was describing, sort of an intentional effort to ramp up deportation system that is even more inhumane than the one in place now. So one way you can take action is share this video. Share the stories that you've been hearing today on your Facebook page. Repost it. Ask people to listen and watch and share it with their networks as well. Share it on Twitter, on Instagram, wherever you have social media, with folks in your church, in your community. And we're going to share a video at the end of this that's a sort of a summary of our time at the border that you can also share as another way to engage and to keep raising awareness. Right now, we're in a time where the story about children being separated from families has sort of fallen off of the headlines, and we need to bring it back, and we need to keep saying this isn't over and we're not done until it's fixed, and we never do this again. And we recognize all people's humanity. So it's on all of us to keep telling that story right now. This video, the video we're going to post, are 2 ways to do videos. Share them with your social network. Tell people you talk to the stories that you've heard today, the things that you've heard and learned listening to what we learned at the border. The second thing you can do is there are several organizations doing incredible work right now to reunite families and provide them with basic needs, as well as helping those who are coming out of the court process. So one that we're going to share on Facebook right now is an effort to raise money for flights for parents to go to where kids are. So even if they are legally able to reunite right now, parents need them, they have to raise the money themselves to fly themselves to where their children are, very often in all the way across the country. So that's a big need. And that effort, it's called Flights for Families. Food, shelter, basic needs in the days as families reunite and then go to their next location or reunite with the rest of their family in the United States. The other effort there that you can support directly and concretely is through Catholic Charities, both in the Rio Grande Valley and the Humanitarian Respite Center that is assisting 100 to 200 people a day, providing meals, food, clothes, a place to rest while they get their transportation to the next location. And Catholic Charities and Lutheran Immigration Refugee Services are the 2 agencies that are reuniting families, also several hundred a day, and need help as well with food, clothes, a place to sleep that's safe while families figure out transportation to their next location. So those are 3 places you can donate. We're going to share those links, as well as KIND, the Kids in Need of Defense. There's a lot of wonderful work being done, and we want to keep supporting that, and we do that in partnership and solidarity. Also, a very easy thing you can do right now, as soon as this is over, share this video. Share the video we're going to show in just a minute. just keep raising awareness. And then this weekend, there will be actions in different parts of the country after that court deadline. And stay tuned to what comes next. After those families are not all reunited, sign up for Faith in Public Life's email list if you haven't yet, and keep posted to our Facebook page for what comes next, what you can be doing locally. Sort of, we're going to be on this until it's done, until it's fixed, or until we get sort of, better policies in place as well. So that's where we are. And we just want to thank everyone today for listening. And I want to thank Reverend Susie, Reverend Sakina Hamlin, and Reverend Maria Swearingen for going on this important delegation with us in June. And then also sharing your experiences and continuing the wonderful work you're doing locally. And I want to thank all our supporters who donated to make that delegation possible through Faith in Public Life. And just, want to continue to do this work together. So just one quick last reminder, what you can do right now, you can share this video. You can share the video we're about to play, and then donate and share the links of places that you can support families right now. So thank you.
Thousands of people are at the federal courthouse in Brownsville, Texas for an ACLU protest calling for the immediate reunification of separated families and the end of the zero tolerance policy.
I feel like this is the soul of our nation is at stake, and we need to set a broad table, and we need to change the public imagination about who is welcome at the table.
I've come on this trip because of wailing mothers. The cries of children have called here.
Just God, we want to pray for the children inside and for the families. We know that you are a loving God. You have told us that whatever we do for the least of these, we do to you. You have told us over and over again in your word that we are to care for the stranger, care for the immigrant, care for the refugee. We know that when we put families in cages, we are putting our Savior in a cage as well.
Today, I'm at the border. This wall behind me is steel, it is tall, it is strong, and it is intended now with a capricious policy built on the backs of children to separate mothers and children, families from their children.
And we're not just talking about the consequences, but we are here daring to challenge the foundational causes